Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. As always, I'm Jonathan, your host here at QuickBird Gaming, and I appreciate you tuning in for another video. So this is going to be an episode of QuickBird Unscripted. That just means no program. I don't have an outline or anything to follow. I'm just going to lay my thoughts out, so no promises. I won't ramble, but I will try to stay on point. Anyway, discussion today is on the release, or the announcement I should say, of the Switch 2 and what's going on with it. When I did my last episode of QuickBird News on Sunday, I had said then that I planned on doing a separate video with all the Switch 2 news. I think a lot of that has already kind of been covered by now. I think most people who want to know about the Switch 2 already do know about it. So I'm just going to touch the highlights and then offer some of my thoughts on what this means for the industry and for Nintendo. So just to kind of summarize, last week during the Nintendo Direct, which I think was on Wednesday, April 2nd, the Nintendo had announced the Switch 2. They gave it a release date, which I believe is June 5th. They had also announced preliminary pricing. I want to say it was $450 American and $333 for a native Japanese-only model. They also, some other things came out. There were some announcements of some exclusive games. I know that From Software has a game coming out for the Switch 2 exclusively. I believe it's Dusk Bloods, a multiplayer vampire shooter. That itself created a little turmoil for From Software fans, because after they did Elden Ring Night Rain, and then they rolled into this next multiplayer game, and From Software had to come out and kind of reassure players, no, we are not moving exclusively to multiplayer titles. We're still going to be focusing on single-player titles. So all that. There was also, I also read somewhere that the Switch 2 was almost named the Super Nintendo Switch, which personally I think would have been a better option, kind of following that pattern of the nostalgia of their old consoles. Since that release, there's been some discussion, because at the same time, in United States politics, Donald Trump had announced the imminent tariffs on other countries in the world, and Nintendo had decided to wait for a full week. I think they said they wanted to come out on the 9th with their updated pricing based on how the tariffs were going to affect the pricing, and that should be later today as of the posting of this video. And if you're asking why I didn't wait for that to make this video, this is going to be my only chance to make this video for the next day or two, so I've been putting it off, so I wanted to go ahead and get it done. Although I would love to have had that information in hand when I recorded this. But I expect the price to go up because of the tariffs, and I've seen industry and experts or guessers say anything that they expect it to go from $450 anywhere from $520 to $600, and that's not including the version that comes bundled with Mario Kart. So that version could be over $600 by the time it's all said and done. Also, something that was announced, and I think this is what was one of the big sticking points, for a lot of the players, for a lot of the Nintendo fans, is that some of their baseline games are going to go up to $80 for the digital version, or $90 for physical. And I know that the vice president, or one of the vice presidents of North American operations, had an interview with IGN a day or two ago, and talked about some of their expectations and why, addressed the price increase on the games. It was the first word I've seen from Nintendo on that price increase, and so they talked about that, and we expect to get some more news later today, along with shipping. Pre-orders are supposed to become available once they've announced their new price, or whatever they're doing in regards to the tariffs. So people will be able to start pre-ordering, and like I said, they're expecting to get these on June 5th. That's kind of a summary of where the Switch 2 is. So the release of a major console and the next Nintendo console. I think the first Switch came out in 2017, so it's the first one in 8 years. So it's kind of a big deal. Now, as to my thoughts on this, I don't really have a dog in this fight, because I don't own a Switch, and I haven't owned a Nintendo console since I bought a DS in 2007. So it's been 18 years since I've owned any kind of Nintendo hardware. And then before that, the last one I had was the original Super NES system, original NES system from like 1985. So I'm not a Nintendo game player. There are some franchises there that interest me, but because Nintendo has this habit, their policy is to wall off their IPs exclusive to their hardware. I just have never done that. I've read a lot of discussion about the Steam Deck versus the Switch. It seems like the Switch 2 specs have really caught up, or maybe even edged past the Steam Deck in terms of raw power. I think it was pretty clear the Deck was ahead of the Switch 1, but it came out 5 years later, so to be expected. And now they're going to be more on par. It really comes down to, if you're in the market for this kind of handheld console, it really comes down to what you want out of your software. And over and over and over again, I see people saying, I didn't buy the Switch for the hardware, I bought it for the games library. Some of these storied franchises, the Mario games, Legend of Zelda, and things like that are exclusive on the Switch or on Nintendo consoles, and now on the Switch 2 are going to, that's the only place they're going to be available legally. So people are going to get that in order to play those games because they like the games. Now, like I said, I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't own a Switch. I don't own a Steam Deck either. I do almost all of my gaming on my desktop. What can I say? I'm old. That's just the way I do it, and a little bit on my phone. But almost all of it is done on my desktop. So I don't really have a vested interest in the console market. I do have to say, based on past and present policies, I am not the biggest fan of Nintendo. 2 episodes ago on my news feature, I think I praised them. I think it was 2 episodes ago, for they had announced a feature during the Direct that basically amounted to a lending library type of feature, that people that have a Nintendo account and they've got their Switch, people have their Switches, but they are in kind of a family group, that you are able to lend out your games to somebody else inside your family group for a couple of weeks. They're able to play it, and then it returns to you. I thought that was a pretty consumer-friendly policy and a gamer-friendly feature. And I'm all about companies that are gamer-friendly. In fact, I recently bought a copy of Baldur's Gate 3 just because I think the Larian Studios is very gamer-friendly. I haven't played it yet, and I don't know when I'm going to get to it, but I wanted to, not that they would notice my support of one game being bought, but I want to support games from companies that are putting the player first. And I think Larian has been very pro-player, pro-friendly. It's one of the reasons that I continue to kind of support Bethesda, even though they don't always release the most bug-free experience, if you know what I mean. Their games are always buggy and riddled with flaws. And now that ZeniMax is under Microsoft, they're even part of a bigger corporate Borg than they were ever before. However, Bethesda has always been very forward-leaning in allowing players to mod their games. They give the tools out for the Elder Scrolls and the Fallout series for people to mod their games and do what they want with them. And I like that, because I hate the idea that players can't mod their games. I don't like say, Capcom's policy where they don't like mods. I don't think any single-player game you should ever make it difficult to mod or to alter your play experience, because once you've paid for it, who cares? If it's a single-player game, companies should allow them to do that, and I really don't like that. I think it's a player-unfriendly policy to do stuff like that. But anyway, I'm kind of drifting off course here. In general, I don't find Nintendo to be a very player-friendly company. For the first thing, I don't like the fact that they do wall off their own IPs exclusive to their hardware. That's really it's a selfish practice. I just recently covered that Sony executives have said, "Gee, we realize that if we offer Sony exclusives on PC, we tend to make a whole lot more money." And my answer was kind of like, "No shit, you just reached a whole audience of players that you weren't reaching before if you do that." I think Sony is kind of starting to come around on that. Nintendo's a lost cause, though. They will always jealously hold on to their IPs, which is fine. It's their intellectual property. I just don't think it's a very friendly practice. And then you can take it a step further. Nintendo comes off, I believe they're a very litigious company. They are very sue-happy. And in some cases that they sue on, I understand. Like they recently sued a file sharing, or they won a lawsuit against a file sharing company in France that was hosting Nintendo emulation games. They got them taken down. I understand that. They're also trying to sue the makers of Pal World, saying it's too close to Pokemon. That's more borderline. And they've even done things like trying to sue a supermarket in Costa Rica because the proprietor was named Mario and he had named his store Super Mario. They didn't use any of the iconography or logos from Nintendo, but they still tried to sue this guy to get him to change his name. And fortunately, the Costa Rican courts told Nintendo to go pound sand. That's way overreaching. And people make the argument, well, you got to defend your IP. Well, that's fine, but that's ridiculous, and Nintendo is stupid for doing that. As far as the price goes, I think the biggest blowback so far to this has not been the price of the Switch 2 itself. People are directing their anger at the U.S. government over the tariff possibility, which is fine. But towards Nintendo, it seems to be towards the price of the games. Right after their Direct, they had another live event where people were flooding and spamming the chat during the event, saying things like, drop the price, drop the price. Going to $80 for games, it seems greedy at this point. I know with inflation, games are eventually going to rise, and I know that there are industry experts that say games need to rise. I disagree at this point, especially because a lot of games, such as Mario Kart, they're being priced to $80. How many times can you play the Mario Kart experience again? Yes, they'll add some quality of life features and some new stuff to the game, but it's basically the same experience. And every time the Nintendo upgrades their console, you got to upgrade your game, buy it again. And I think that's a pretty shady practice. So again, how many times can you play these things over and over? Now, I know some people will say, we love the games and we want to play them. I'm not going to tell people they're not getting their value for that. That value is kind of a very specific and personal quality that you're going to find in a product. A lot of people wouldn't say that they'd want to spend $250 on a reciprocating cordless saw. I would, because I do a lot of home do-it-yourself, and I do construction, and I do some woodworking. So to me, it's worthwhile. But to somebody who doesn't do those things, it's not worth that kind of money. So I understand if somebody says, well, I get enough joy and value out of an $80 Nintendo game, it's worth it to me. And fine, you do you, boo. It's all good. But I think in general, hiking the price to $80 or $90 for a physical copy, which in some cases doesn't even appear to be, a physical copy. It's just a card you plug in for a download, if I understand the Switch hardware correctly. That's a huge boost, and it's going to be, it's going to be one of these things where people say, "Oh, is this going to now change the price of games across the board?" I hope not, because I think as the price of AAA games starts to go up, what you're going to see is a narrowing of the number of overall games in the industry that get sold, which means that with the bloat in price and overhead and everything else, you're going to start seeing more companies and more games getting squeezed out, not doing as well. If you can only sell 100 total games, if you can only sell $1,000 worth of total games in a year, say for example, you go from $70 to $80 or $90. Now instead of buying 15 games, you only buy 12. Those other couple of games that don't get bought are going to mount up over time, and it's going to start pushing, I think, some of the AAA companies into a worse financial position. So I don't think it's a good thing to start to just kind of universally start seeing game prices go up. Nintendo has taken this plunge, so we'll see what happens for them. Now, do I think any of the price hikes on their games or the Switch 2, even with tariffs, are going to affect Nintendo? Not at all. I think there are enough people that are invested in Nintendo. There are enough fans and people who are interested in that ecosystem that are going to continue to buy into it. I don't think it's going to affect them at all. Do I think people are going to pay $6 or $7 or whatever it was to play the Nintendo Tour game that they announced with the Switch 2? And in case you weren't aware of that, they essentially have a digital video game-ish tour of the Switch 2 showing all its features that they literally wanted to charge you $6 or $7 to play. And that was just a WTF moment for me, because who the hell does that? Well, Nintendo does, apparently. Litigiousness and greediness greed go hand in hand when it comes to Nintendo. As far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, it's kind of a shit company ethics-wise. They're in it to make money, and not just to make money, that would be okay, but to milk money out of the fans. They're stepping right up there with the ranks of Ubisoft and EA in that regard. Now, again, if people love the games and want to play them, I will never judge the players for doing that. That's their choice, and that's what they want to do. Me personally, I've seen nothing that justifies me getting into this ecosystem. I played some of the original Zelda games back in the day. I liked them. Super Mario Brothers, Mario World, those games are all fine. But there's nothing in their exclusive catalog that makes me go, ooh, I want to drop $600 on a Switch 2, and then another $80 for the game. If I was going to do that, why not just get the deck? Because all my games are on PC, and I could play them. I can cloud save my Steam games, and games on Steam routinely are much less expensive than that. Even full price AAA games usually are on sale eventually. So I don't see anything that needs to go into that. People have told me that I would really like Xenoblade Chronicles as a series, because I like Final Fantasy and series like YS, however you pronounce that series, the kind of the Japanese role-playing game types. I do like those, but not enough to drop that kind of cash for it. So nothing. I won't be participating in this, which is why I said originally I didn't have any stake in the process. But it's interesting watching what happens, and now it would be interesting to see what happens with this. I know that Valve has mentioned another version of the deck coming out, but they're a couple years out from that. So for the moment, Nintendo may kind of assume the top mantle on the handheld market, even if only by a little bit. Because I know a lot of people don't want to give up their deck either, that for the reasons I just mentioned, for things like cloud saves and synchronizing and being able to play your PC games and price across the board, they're going to stick with it. But I think Nintendo will do just fine with this. I think they'll make a ton of money, and I think they will continue to keep their fans. I don't think this is going to drive anybody off, and even the price of the console and the games will not be enough. And I'm hoping that this doesn't encourage everybody else to run out and buff their game price to $80. That may be a useless thought, because when GTA 6 comes out in 6 or 12 months, it may jump to $80 or $100, in which case that standard will be set, and we're all screwed as consumers at that point. So anyway, that's kind of all my thoughts on the Switch 2. I know I rambled a little bit on this and got off course, and I apologize for that. So I'm going to wrap this up now. It's 4:30 in the morning here locally, and I know I look like a wreck because I haven't been up for very long, didn't sleep well, but here it is. I'm gonna have to go make some breakfast in the next half hour or so and go start my day. We got to do a little traveling today, so I'm gonna wrap this up. And thank you if you watched all the way to the end for listening to me babble. If you have any comments about the Nintendo Switch 2, if you think I've said something controversial or got something completely wrong, let me know down below. I appreciate it. I read all the comments. Obviously, I don't get that many on my videos, but I do read them all and try to respond to as many as I can. And I'd love to hear what y'all think. So if you have any comments, let me know. If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing to the channel. Drop a like on the video. You know the drill. Same old, same old. So anyway, I'm going to get off of here and go get my day started. Thank you all for tuning in. You all go out there and live your best lives, whether with Nintendo or without. And y'all stay gaming.